Welcome to the chapter 19 of the discussion, which is on communication. In this chapter, we are going to learn the details of what is communication, the meaning of communication, what are the different issues involved in communication, what are the different steps in communication, what are the different types of communication and the details of those types like interpersonal communication, group communication, organizational communication, and also we are going to learn about the barriers of communication. So, as a chapter, the objectives of this chapter are to develop an understanding of the importance of communication, the elements of communication, to know the communication process model. We are also to form an idea of types of channels, channel richness, communicating within the organizations, how do we communicate externally, what are the barriers to effective communication, and how do we improve communications in organizations. First, we will start with the definition of communication and also the importance of communication. As we see, when we are talking of the importance of communication, the definition of communication deals with the transmission of information and the understanding through the use of common symbols. So, when we are looking into this definition, when it is transmission of information between two persons or there is a sender and a receiver, this could be persons, this could be other things also. So, one point there is a sender, there is a receiver, there is something to communicate the message which is there to communicate, there is a medium to communicate that message, and when communication is proper, when we use language, when we use symbols which is known to both the people who are involved in the process of communication, and then understanding of the communication means like there is a feedback regarding whether I have understood the message in the sense that the sender wanted me to understand it or not. This whole process is called communication, and there lies the importance of communication. It is defined as the transmission of information, not only transmission, the understanding of that information through the use of common symbols. And when we talk of understanding of the information, here feedback plays a very important role. How do I tell the other person that I have understood what you have told me in the way you wanted me to do it is through the process of feedback. The communication process is the whole lot of steps which takes place, which are there in between when we are talking of transmission of information. It is something, the process which occurs, happens, like how this message passes on from the source and the receiver, and how this transference takes place, and how this understanding of this whole situation takes place. This whole gamut is called the communication process, and there are important issues related to each of these steps. What we will see now in details is the communication process, what could be the different issues related to each of these steps, and how to take care of those issues. So, what we are talking of here are the elements of communication. In the elements of the communication, of course, the first person, the first thing which is there, or the person who is there, first element is the communicator. There has to be someone who wants to communicate certain things. So, that person is called a communicator. And who is he? He is in organization's behavior context, maybe a person, employee with certain ideas, intentions and a purpose for communicating. He must be communicating with certain purpose in mind, and he or she wants to communicate certain things. So these are the ideas in the person's mind, and he intends to communicate and with certain purpose, and he communicates with certain purpose, and he wants that purpose to be known by others. That person is called a communicator. Now, when the communicator is there and he has a purpose in mind about things that he wants to communicate it to others, then comes the question of next step, which is called encoding. In encoding, what is done? The communicator tries to explain the purpose that he has in mind in certain lucid terms. Symbols he uses, languages that he uses, that expresses the purpose that he has in mind into things that are communicable to others. So, encoding is translating the communicator's ideas into a systematic set of symbols and language that expresses the communicator's purpose. So, this is very important. When you are talking of encoding, we are using only that systematic set of symbols and language which is expressing the communicator's purpose, the purpose that is there at the back of his mind or intention that he has, and encoding helps to express that. When that encoding is done, what emerges out of it is the message. The message is the result of the encoding process. This encoding process can be both in the verbal form and in the non-verbal form, and the message can likewise be intended message or unintended message. So, what we find over here, there is a chance of learning, training at each of these steps. Like we have to know properly how to encode our ideas into using different symbols, so that we can emerge at a proper message that we want to transmit to others. And what are the proper verbal cues that are to be given, what are the associated non-verbal cues, so that we can transmit intended messages and we can reduce the possibility of transmitting unintended messages. Next comes in process is the medium. Medium is through what medium would we, or the carrier, message carrier, would we like to transmit our message. It depends again on what is the urgency, what is the richness of that medium, whom do we want to communicate, how many people do we want to address at a certain point of time. All these factors will help us to choose a particular medium, because media vary, the medium that we choose, it varies according to its effectiveness in reaching different people. It has both its pros and cons, and like if you want to talk one to one, if you want to address many people. So, these are issues that you have to choose while you are selecting your medium for communication. Next is the process which is after medium. At the other end of the medium is the decoding process done by the person who is called the receiver or the recipient of the message. Now, the decoding process is done by the receiver's thought process that interprets the message in terms understandable to the receiver. So, the receiver will try to use his own thought processes and interpret the message in the terms that he is able to understand it. And then what is done is he or she, the receiver, gives the feedback about the message to the communicator. Feedback regarding what is this feedback? It is the response from the receiver to the communicator, which helps the communicator to determine whether the message was received and produced the intended effect, or whether it was understood in a very different way by the receiver. What happens in one-way communication where there is no way to receive this feedback? The communicator never knows like whether what he intended to transmit as a part of the message was actually received in that same sense or not by the receiver. But in two-way communication process where there is a chance to get the feedback, so we can understand like whether that message has created the effect or not. So, this feedback can be given in various ways, like we see through verbal exchanges or through indirectly through some of our attitudes like our behaviors, like absenteeism is increasing, productivity is declining, and all these things when we understand the message in a different way. When one important thing over here is that like if you can understand like there could be a possibility when we are talking of the receiver is making sense of the message, he is utilizing his own thought process to decode the message and understand it. So, the communicator must be very aware of the fact like if I am communicating certain things, I am communicating it for whom? Who is there at the other end who is going to receive my message? What are the like I have to see, even if I am not seeing that person in front of me, but I have to be very aware of the characteristics of this person, know this person in and out in the sense what could be his thought process, what is his personality pattern, his or her personality pattern, how he interprets facts, how he generally interprets facts could be, what is the process of thinking of this person, so that I can communicate the message in the way that this person understands. When I do it, then only the receiver receives it and interprets the message, and I communicate what I want to communicate. Otherwise, my intent to communicate a certain message, my intention to communicate certain message, and what I want to communicate and what the person understands as a part of being a receiver could be very different, because if I do not understand the receiver and send certain message, then the receiver may not be in the same platform of my thought process to receive it in the same way and make the same sense that I want the receiver to make out of the message that I am sending. So, first we have to understand each other. Specifically, the communicator has to understand his target receiver for whom the message is designed, whom he wants to convey, he or she wants to convey, and convey it accordingly so that the receiver understands it. This is very important. Another point is, concern point over here is noise. Noise is that factor that distorts the intended message, and it may occur in each of the element of communication. So, where can this noise occur? Noise can occur starting from the communicator himself or herself. Like if I want to communicate something and I have certain intentions in mind and I want to communicate certain things, I have certain idea which I want to communicate, then I should be very clear and specific about what I want to communicate. If my ideas, if my concepts are not clear, if I do not know exactly what I want to communicate, then I am not very clear about the purpose of this communication. At certain point of time, my ideas may mix up and I am not able to encode a proper message. So, first is, if I want to communicate something, I must know what I want to communicate, when I want to communicate, to whom I want to communicate, and why I want to communicate certain things. These parts should be very specifically known to the communicator in order to reduce the noise concerned at this part. Next, in the encoding stage, when these things I know it very clearly, what, when, where, why and how, then what happens, you know how to encode your message and what are the possible wordings should be there, what possible symbols should be there, where to stop, how to write that message, what is the language that I use, what will it be a very like assertive part of communication, what will be the emotional content in that communication. So, or will it be a very rational message. So, how that message will look like and what words to use, all these factors, what are the symbols to be used over there, will be known only when I know clearly what are the purpose of my communication and to whom I want to communicate and what changes do I want to bring through this communication, expected purpose of expected objectives out of this communication, what I really want to do through this communication. When you are talking of the message, accordingly the way that you encode will determine what type of message that you are writing or what type of message that you are communicating. Is it a rational message? Is it emotionally loaded message? What is the verbal component of it? What is the non-verbal component of it? Is it a direct message that you are giving, or it is indirect message where you are maybe communicating something on top, but underlying meaning is something different, hidden message you are giving to someone. So, all these will your purpose will try to define your message. Next important thing which is over there is what is the medium that you choose. That and there could be noises in choosing this medium. If you are not very clear about the richness of the medium, which medium will transmit which type of message very fast, so that your communication becomes an effective communication, then what happens, you may choose a wrong medium for the type of message that you want to communicate and to a target audience. So, who is your target audience? Who is your target receiver? First, you have to know that whether that person is conversant with the medium that you are choosing, or that person does not use this medium, is not very comfortable with this type of medium. These are the considerations, and whether the type of message that I want to send will travel fast through this medium, will be understandable through this medium, or further noises will be created. These are conditions that you should understand while we are choosing our medium. Noises could be there in decoding also. When we get a message, our attitudes, our personality pattern, our interests, our backgrounds, our values, all these variables may affect the decoding of the message which has been sent by the communicator. When we are talking of feedback, noises could be there at this stage also, because sometimes we do not know how to give a proper feedback. We have to give the feedback. There are ways of giving feedback. Do we give instantly a negative feedback if it is to be given, or we try to give it in a sandwiched manner? Are we aggressive in giving our feedback, or we are assertive in giving our feedback? So, what is the technique that we take to give the feedback? Now, do we give person oriented feedback? Sometimes what happens while giving the feedback, we are exactly not giving the feedback about the message, but what happens, we give feedback about the person who is sending the message, which again creates noise in this whole process. So, if we are to give the feedback about the message, about the communication, then we have to know, like we have to give the feedback about the content of the communication and how we have understood it. So, in this, so if we know these things, if we are trained in these things, if we practice these things in proper way, then we can reduce the noises involved in each of these stages. So, channel is the medium selected by the sender through which the message travels to the receiver. So, these channels are in organization could be formal channels and could be informal channels. Now, what are the formal channels of communication? Is formal channels of communication are designed by the organizations, established by the organization, and transmit messages that are relevant to the and related to the professional activities of the members. So, when you join a particular organization, what happens? You join a particular post in the organization, and there is a organizational structure, there is a hierarchy that you join to, or you become a part of the team member. So, as a result, by virtue of joining that position or by virtue of joining that team, you become a part of a communication system which is there in the organization, related to the daily work that you need to do. You get a communication from your peers, you get a communication from your supervisors, like things that you have to do. And also there could be centrally established channels of communication which helps you to know, like what are the benefits that you are going to receive, what is your pay system, and what are the rewards, what will be your performance appraisal. All these things are established by the organization to transmit messages that are professionally related to the professional activities of the members by being a part of a particular organization. When we are talking of informal channels of communication, these are informal channels are formed as a result of joining, like when people come together because of interest, personal interests, and you start sharing, or proximity of working, whatever it is, and you start sharing your personal and social messages. So, these channels of communication are very spontaneous in nature and emerge as a response to individual choices. Now, these formal channels and informal channels could be aligned to each other. If not, they could be in contra to each other also, as we will see in the later part of this discussion, like what are the formal channels of communication present in the organization, what are the informal channels that develop in the organization, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of the informal channels of communication. When we are choosing a particular communication channel, we are choosing it based on one of the primary characteristics, which is called channel richness. When you are talking of channel richness, we want to see the amount of information that can be transmitted during a communication process. So, when we are talking of rich channels of communication, so it is defined by whether you are able to handle multiple cues at a time, what is the feedback, and whether you facilitate rapid feedback, and whether it is personal or impersonal in nature. These three dimensions will define the richness of particular channels. Communication within an organization flows in four distinct directions that we call downward communication, upward communication, horizontal communication, and diagonal communication. When we are talking of downward communication, when we are talking of downward communication, we are speaking of communication that follows from the boss to the juniors, or as a part of the team which follows from the team leader to the other members of the team. So, what happens over here, like when we are talking of downward communication, generally we are talking of communication which follows from people in higher level, higher positions, higher authority level to people in the lower authority level. And these communications are regarding like more of instructions, what you have to do as a part of your instructions, memos, job memos that you get, like do these things, do that things. So, instructions, job memos, then procedures, manuals, all these things, company publications, these you get from top to bottom. Like it flows, this communication flows from people higher in hierarchy and authority to people lower in hierarchy and authority. When we are talking of upward communication, then we are talking of a communication flow from below, from down to up. So, here what happens, what are the different nature of this communication? Here we are like people lower in hierarchy tries to communicate to people higher up in the hierarchy about certain things, like firstly could be their grievances, like whether they are satisfied or not, like any suggestions that they want to give, appeals, grievances, and procedures to be taken in group meetings. These are the certain things. So, what happens in large organizations, it is if this process is not channelized, if it is not inbuilt in the system of the organization, like how to get this feedback from the lower level and move it to the upper level, information may get lost in between. So, there should be some organizationally designed process, so that the and that reflects a culture of a very open organization who gives a proper hearing to what the employees are telling and what are their views on certain things, issues, how they will express their views about the different procedures, work procedures, and how what suggestions they can give to improve these procedures. So, there should be some organizationally designed mechanism to tap this information and move it up to the higher levels. When we are talking about horizontal communication, we are talking, when you are talking about horizontal communication, it is about communicating at the same hierarchy. So, like person from one position is communicating, is trying to communicate with the person from the who is working in the same level, maybe at a certain other department. So, what it depends. So, organization, it again depends on the culture of the organization, whether there is this is open to discussion, like horizontally people can communicate, or they have to come through the departments and its boss and they can communicate with each other. So, if it is a organization which encourages horizontal communication, then people at two different departments working at the same level may communicate with each other and share about their work processes and increase their social networks also. So, it all depends how the communication is encouraged in the organization. Diagonal communication is a communication which flows between employee and a higher level manager. So, of maybe other department to whom he is not reporting to. So, this is important for the people, especially for the lower level people in the organization, to express their views, to get to know from others certain learnings, and if the organization is open enough, this type of communication is also encouraged. Like if in certain cases you are not able to share with your direct boss, or you want to learn something different which you feel like the other people in different sections can help you to learn, whether you are able to communicate directly to that person or not, or you have to come through that process of you have to tell your boss will refer to the other person and then only he agrees to talk to you or communicate to you. All these things will determine whether the diagonal communication is encouraged in the organization or not. Communication within a particular organization can be at three levels, like interpersonal level, group level and organizational level. So, when we are talking of interpersonal communication, this communication is which flows from individual to individual and in the face to face and in group settings. So, it varies from like direct orders to casual expressions and influences how people feel about the organization. So, it is one to one either face to face communications, and whether you do it in like in face to face and group settings. So, it can be direct orders and to casual expressions. So, the range is from formal to informal. Different types of interpersonal communications are like first is of course oral communication, when we try to express orally about the message, what it is, how we are feeling about certain things, and we communicate it directly through oral message. The advantage of this is it is very speedy and it gives a proper feedback. Disadvantage could be like that message can get distorted, because while you are transmitting an oral message, generally it is not documented in the form of either keeping a record of it, and so it becomes very intangible. And what happens, because there is no evidence, no proof generally remains of this oral message, what happens, people may later on distort your message and try to put words in your mouth. So, that is the disadvantage of this oral communication. When we are talking of written communication, it is more formal than an oral communication, because it is written, it is tangible, it is verifiable, and later on you can refer back to it as a part of evidence. But disadvantage of this message is that this type of message, it is like it is very time consuming, and you do not get immediate feedback. What happens in oral communication, while you are communicating, if you are communicating directly face to face, you can see, you can understand you can interpret the expressions on the receiver's face, his body language, his or her body language, responses, and you can get instantaneous immediate feedback and try to reorient your thought process while communicating orally with the other person. But in terms of written communication, you do not have those possibilities of like getting immediate feedback. You get feedback maybe, but the time is, it is a deferred feedback that you get when the communication reaches that person, second writes you back and it reaches you. So, it is already a very deferred feedback, it is not immediate feedback. So, in non-verbal, so that was oral communication and written communication. Another part of communication is the non-verbal communication. So, in non-verbal communication, what is done? Information is sent by a communicator that may or may not be related to the verbal communication. So, it is sent by via physical cues such as facial features and eye movements, postures, distance, what is the voice, tone, and gestures. So, these are not related directly to the verbal communication, but it expresses a lot about how the person is reacting to the communication that is being made. And non-verbal communication may differ from other forms of communication in the sense like it's very very difficult to hide it from others. You are not able to suppress it from others, and it's more apparent to the others than to those who produce them, and people may interpret these nonverbal cues in different ways. So, eye contact, eye movement, and the emotional intensity delivered by the physical cues such as distance, posture and gestures. This tells a lot about the how a person is receiving a particular message. So, sometimes whatever is communicating verbally is supported by the non-verbal cues also, but sometimes there is a mismatch between the verbal cues that has been given through the verbal message and the non-verbal cues produced by the non-verbal message. So, prudence of the communicator lies in the fact, like if he is able to interpret these two together and find out what exactly is going in the receiver's mind and about how he is he is reacting to the communication that was intended for that person to receive. So, these are very important things, and these we can get the advantage of understanding these nonverbal cues only when we are in a face to face communication, when we see the receiver in front of us, either directly or through certain electronic media. We have to see the receiver in front, so that we have to hear the receiver and specifically see the receiver, if it is so that we can study the body language and get to know that how that person is reacting. So, but again we have to be very trained, and we have to be very expert in interpreting the non-verbal cues, because if we interpret it differently, it will create altogether a different meaning of what this person is maybe trying to communicate. So, advantages of non-verbal communication is it supports other communications and provides observable expressions of emotions and feelings, and disadvantage is misperception of body language or gesture can influence receiver's interpretation of message. Problems in communicating with other person can arise from perceptual differences and interpersonal style differences. So, these happens when we are in an interpersonal situation. That is what we were discussing when we are discussing noises in communication. If the receiver and the communicator are not at the same platform of thought process, if the communicator does not know the perceptual style, interpersonal style of the receiver, then what happens? The receiver may not understand the message in the sense that the communicator wants the receiver to understand, and may make his or her own meanings based on his own perceptual ways of looking at the world and the meaning that he or she derives out of it. So, that could result in noises of communication. When we are talking of perceptions at group levels, we are talking of three common formal small group networks which are there in the organization, and the patterns of communication in it. The three ways to communicate in a group are: first is chain, second is wheel, and the third is all channel. When we are talking of a chain of communication, what happens? In this formal chain of communication, it is typically vertical in nature. It is about the work that needs to be communicated, and it tells about an authority chain. So, when we are talking of a chain of communication, it looks like something like this part, this sort of like here. So, what is rigidly followed is the formal chain of command. So, who talks to whom sort of thing, both in the, like typically in the hierarchy sort of thing. This is called chain. Next we come to what is called wheel. When we are talking of the wheel network, there is a central leader, and these are the followers, and all communications are directed to the leader and they derive from the leader. This is called the wheel of communication. So, leader is the central to this communication process. Communication gets directed towards the leader and come back from the leader. There is no linkage between the people who are, they are not communicating with each other. When we are talking of all channels communication, when we are talking of all channels communication, it is something of this nature. Where all the parties can communicate to each other and they are very active in this process of communication. So, all the members can communicate to each other, get to know. So, there is also horizon, you can find in this, in all channels communication, there is upward communication, there is downward communication, there is horizontal communication, there is diagonal communications. All channels are active and every person can communicate with the other person based on the primary thing is what we need to know and what we need to learn and what is the source from where we get this feedback, how do we get to know things properly. When we are talking of informal channels of communication, we are talking of informal networks in communication in group situations, and one of the primary informal network in the group situation is the grapevine. The characteristics of grapevine is it is informal in nature and it is not controlled by the management. So, and it is informal, and so how does it look like? Grapevine looks like this sort of like one goes to other, the other comes, and it's every person trying to communicate with the other person, every person trying to communicate with the other person in this way, and everybody can communicate with the other things. So, when it goes in this way, these are like telegraph wires, that's going. So, what happens over here? This is informal in nature, it is not controlled by management, and most of the employees perceive it to be more reliable source and believable source of information than the formally designed source of information. And in most cases, it is used to serve the self interest of the person who is generating this communication, and it is generally used to spread rumors in the organization. What happens when there is a need for particular information regarding the certain important issues in the organization, and the organization setup, the management does not provide any avenue, any clear cut information about these things, stories start spreading, and it spreads very fast through this informal communication channel, which is called grapevine. Like what happens as these generates, new facts goes on adding to it, and people actually, it comes to like rumors, it spreads very fast as a form of rumor, in which the truth is like debatable. What is the truth? People go on making up stories for it, and it spreads very fast. So, and it generates in ambiguous conditions, and sometimes it gives rise to anxiety. What can be done is, the organization can use this grapevine positively for its own purpose to connect in informal way to the employees. Like even before, because the speed of grapevine is very fast. So, if we want to spread certain message which will help the organization to perform, we can use this with grapevine positively for the organization also. And there lies the prudence of the manager, how he or she is going to utilize this grapevine. So, before we come to the organizational level, what happens in this another type of communication, which is very prevalent at the informal network level for the groups, is also about the social networkings that are becoming very important. These are also informal networks that people form, and where you have to become a member, and you tell your views about these things. So, you express your views in a platform, you get connected to your like-minded people, you get connected to others who share your views, and the speed of this network is also very fast. Now, organizations can utilize social networks also for the purpose of the better performance of the organization. Otherwise, if there is lack of understanding, lack of communication, lack of openness and trust to the employees from the organization's side, this communication, these networks, informal networks, either grapevines or social networks, may work against the organization's purpose also. So, because if the purposes of the organizations and employees' purpose, their feelings, their interests, their goals are not matching, and the organization are not very clear about transmitting messages, and they are hiding certain messages from the people, they are not open to them to tell about this, like why things are done in certain ways, why employees are expected to perform in certain ways, what they are going to get in near future, why are these expectations from them. If these questions are not answered properly from the organization side, what happens? Like they start thinking in their own way, try to fill up these gaps with their level of understanding, their ways of filling up this with messages that they can gather from their own sources, and these grapevines and social networks, they may try to act against the purpose of the organization. So, organizational communication is also one of the vital issues of communication, and what organization can do to give a proper message, to share information with the employees and to receive feedback is one of the vital part of this discussion when we are talking of communications, and we will take it up in our next lecture to be followed. Thank you.